the land of swimming pools and movie stars. And just two lefts and a hard right from the Hollywood sign.
Come here, Daddy. Oh, you look so good.
I meant the other direction. Harrison's Hangout. Harrison on the highway.
And it is 4 minutes past the hour. Harrison with you, your new best friend. The highway today as I am live inside of Marilyn Monroe's former apartment in West Hollywood, California. And many of us who have a DirecTV, as I have, or Time Warner Corporation, which I also have, or Dish, which I also have, because I have to monitor obsessively, of course, everything that's said and done constantly. But one of the big things I noticed today while listening to NPR as they were pushing Fox News. Not they were selectively pushing it, but they accept the money from Fox News while I think selectively avoiding certain storylines that might offend some of their sponsors. This is part of the larger world we look at. When we explore what news media do we trust anymore, we end up scratching our heads and saying, Europe, at least is one of the better first choices. But domestically, there is good stuff, and there are people who are the watchdogs, and they tend to constantly expose the monkey shines, the buffoonery, the Mr. Ringling's big top that goes on, the prestidigitation in the news cycle, so that you and I can be unwrangled, unwrapped, and untethered from a lot of BS and nonsense. As we know, recent reports talk about Yahoo News as being the largest print news organ now, that in concert with AOL's Patch and the rest of these services, that many of us now look for our hard news at Comedy Central. The days of Walter Cronkite, long croaked, so we now go to Jon Stewart to find out what do they really say in the White House. This is the world we live in. So I want to introduce a man by the name of Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, yes, if I were from England or New York, Media Matters, and co-author of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. As you could see, he's holding up the book. And Ari, we're really glad to have you aboard.
Thank you for having me, Harrison.
Hold up the book again, because now you're in the shot, and we want to see the beautiful cover.
There we go. There's the book.
Now, big splattered red letters that say F-O-X, Fox. I think we get it at a glance. Something's going on here to emblazon that thing on the front cover. And what has been going on has been happening for well over a decade, hasn't it?
Yeah, the book's full title is The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. And it's the story of how Roger Ailes, who's this fascinating figure in American culture, managed to take over a news network and really turn it into an arm of the Republican Party. And we tell that story using leaked memorandum, the network's own words, speeches that network employees gave on cruise ships of all places, to show that the network intentionally, with malice and with knowledge, manipulates the political process as part of their mission.
We're talking to Ari Rabin-Havt, the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect, the book that he just showed up. And you guys have been working on this for many years. We've looked to you. We've sourced you repeatedly. Back when I was on in the Air America days and working in Clear Channel, in that environment, we went to you constantly to source stories. And this is no surprise. I think even Fox watchers know that there's something comfortable about what they're watching. It's familiar, and it's full of code, but it speaks to the kind of knuckle-walking Hispidulite in Alabama. Pardon me for saying it that way, but I was just down in Alabama, and Fox News was on in the gas station. It was on in the diner. It was on everywhere, as if it were Pravda, the local Pravda, and it kind of is, isn't it?
Well, I think it's an apt comparison to think about Fox News as the media arm of a political party, which is exactly what Pravda was. And I think, look, they have huge audiences across the country in every state, but huge audiences doesn't mean it's good journalism or moral. It's an operation that seeks at its core to harm the political process. And what do I mean by that? Well, our book opens on a cruise ship in the middle of the Mediterranean, which is very rare for a media criticism book. So you know you're not getting something normal. with a speech given by the network's managing editor, Bill Salmon. And he's the head of all their Washington News. And he gets on this cruise ship and he says, you know, I created a little political mischief before the election. I went on air and called Barack Obama a socialist, even though I didn't believe it. Let's just parse that out. You have the head of their news division, not an opinion host, not Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly or a guy who's on air to give opinion. The guy who's in charge of all their political coverage, admitting he went on air and said the president of the person who was running for president, who's now president of the United States, was a socialist, even though he himself did not believe that to be true. If journalism's core mission is to deliver the truth, then Fox violated that on principle. And by not dismissing him as soon as this became public, they proved that this is something that was intentional.
You know, it's interesting that you say that as we talk to Ari Rabin-Havt, the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. We've had David Brock on the show many times, and he writes a foreword in this, or at least has a significant presence in your book.
He was the co-author of the book.
Co-author of the book.
Yep.
One of the things that speaks to so many of us is this term journalist. Now, when I was growing up, even 10 years ago, we had reporters. Now everyone is a journalist. If you have a fucking keyboard like this, notice the lack of FCC here. If you have a keyboard like this, you are a journalist. And microblogger sitting in the basement, Timmy in Seattle, who can bang out a blog, Yahoo News considers him a journalist, as does AOL. Anderson Cooper and all of his journalists. And it gives it a fancy flourish where if you refer to somebody as a journalist, you don't suspect whether or not they have the credibility. Did they actually ever touch the AP style handbook? Did they actually ever go to school? Did they actually ever, comb Molly Hyven's hair? Are they the real deal? But the term, the use of language, and this is what I'm getting at, and you speak to this in your book, how language and crafting and framing a position can change people's reality so intensively.
Exactly. And I think I give a pretty wide berth to the word journalist at this point. I think there are good people sitting in basements breaking stories. I mean, for example, Marcy Wheeler, who's a blogger on a website called Fire Dog Lake, who is from Michigan, knew more about the Scooter Libby trial than every national reporter. They were all looking to her for leads on that case. But it's about, you should know your source, you should trust your source, and there are real journalists who behave worse than kind of people who don't have that skill set. I think what Fox does is take it a step further. We have memos of them ordering their journalists to use specific politically framed messages, such as calling the healthcare bill the government option instead of the public option, after Fox News' in-house pollster Frank Luntz said, if you want to defeat healthcare, make sure it's called the government option. Then you have then a memo sent from Bill Salmon saying everyone should call it the government option, not the public option. And what happens? That day forward, people like Bret Baier only called it the government option.
Let's talk for a second, Ari, about Planned Parenthood.
Sure.
And the Fox effect. Planned Parenthood, I'm a WASP, whatever the hell that is, in 2012. My mother was in the junior league. My mother helped Planned Parenthood. This is what Republicans of that era did. Is you knew that women needed services, that birth control was probably a smart idea. Back in the 1970s, overpopulation was considered a big deal and a real threat. And Fox has turned Planned Parenthood into an abortion machine going from California to New York with no stop anywhere. And again, if you repeat a message 6 times, as we know in advertising, it becomes familiar enough to people that they start to own it as a reality. And Fox is brilliant at this over and over again, as you say so smartly, reframing the issue, but in a way using advertising technique.
Well, I think we broke down how Fox attacks progressive groups like Planned Parenthood, like Acorn, like people like Van Jones. And and like Media Matters, frankly, and it's a simple 6-step cycle they go through. Step 1, not Fox, but some conservative outlet, typically somewhere on the internet, comes up with a charge that's completely false. Fox then picks up that charge and runs it ad nauseum across their station. And by ad nauseum, the new Black Panther Party story they ran that 90 times in a matter of a few weeks. They'll run it over and over and over and over again until what they're saying becomes fact. Step 3, they'll complain that other media aren't covering it. Step 4, other media will cover it because they've gotten under pressure from Fox. Step 5, Fox will get credit for breaking this huge story. And step 6, the story will turn out to be false, but the retraction only gets a scintilla of the coverage as a story. So
and the retraction may happen months later when people don't even remember the original story.
Right. So, for example, in the new Black Panther Party case, Fox ran 90 segments and spent 88 seconds saying the Justice Department had cleared everyone of wrongdoing. So that gives you a straight up example of time. It's also a network that makes fake news real news. So, every November and December, like clockwork, you can anticipate Fox News will be covering the war on Christmas. And this year, they ran something. There were something like 40 minutes of coverage on the war on Christmas in December on Bill O'Reilly's show, and 8 minutes of coverage of actual wars. If that gives you any idea of how they work.
Well, it's. I remember telling my grandmother, this would have been about 10 or 12 years ago, and she was still alive and living in Sarasota, Florida area. And I asked her to do a medical experiment. And I said, turn off the TV set. She's a reader. She's not a nitwit sitting in a lazy boy staring at this thing all day, but she watches television like the rest of us humans. And I said, turn off Fox and see how you feel a month later. Fox specifically, because Bush was in the saddle, and this was in the mid-2000s, and it was having a material effect on her. And if you'll remember, Ari, at that time, Fox was running little slates with station IDs, local station IDs, and they were more network IDs on Fox News. And one of them was a brick wall, and a black silhouette goes whoosh by, and the logo was Fox Safe at Home. And it was code for the Negroes are coming to get you. And the more she would watch this 100 times a day, seeing these bumpers and slates, the more locks on her doors. This is in white folks USA in Florida, too, right?
Well, I was just on, before I came on here, the Lars Larson show, which is a conservative radio show. And he was kind of appalled to learn that we thought that Fox had said that had put in people's minds that Barack Obama was a Muslim. He was appalled to hear that fact. It's quite interesting how people can be blind to what's right in front of their face.
And one of the techniques that's very efficient, instead of pointing at somebody and saying, he's a Muslim, you say, people seem to think he's a Muslim. We're going to find out why.
Or you run stories claiming he went to a madras, even though he didn't. Or you talk about him bowing to Muslim leaders, which he didn't. Or you talk about
Saudi kings.
Or you talk about him. Or you talk about how he didn't celebrate. He didn't issue an Easter proclamation, even though he had an Easter brunch at the White House and gave an Easter address. He didn't issue an Easter proclamation, so he clearly didn't have enough Easter in him.
We're talking to Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine, co-author with David Brock. And the question that's obvious here is, what's the payoff for Fox? Are they that integrated in so much business and stuff that there's a financial upside, or are they preying on a large group of people with intense insecurities, knowing that they will find succor and comfort in a relationship with something like Fox?
Well, my friend Clay Johnson, who's a tech guy, and he's a programmer and tech guy in DC. He recently wrote a book called The Information Diet. And he said media consumption, you can compare it to food consumption. You can base people's media consumption on a simple rule. Pizza tastes better than broccoli. You want to be affirmed by your media choices. You don't want to learn. And I think that's what Fox fundamentally preys on. They prey on the idea that people just want to be affirmed. They don't want to learn, which is why, interestingly, Fox doesn't spend a lot of money or time actually reporting the news as much as they spend time opinionating on the news.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, they are fun to watch.
Well,
And I'm gonna hand them that. Much as KFI, a local, extremely conservative AM talk station here, it's great radio.
Is that the home of John and Ken, KFI?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The production quality, I mean, they still have like associate producers and a news team in-house at Clear Channel. This is rare stuff in 2012. So it's big, rich, full radio. But if you actually were to read a text of the content, you would horripilate, implode, and wither. But audibly, it's beautiful.
That's one of the things we address in the book. Like Roger Ailes, why we focus on him is he's a unique talent. He's one of the greatest television producers of the 20th century. You're talking about a guy who at 21 was a gopher on the Mike Douglas show, which was in a single market in the U.S., and by 26 had taken it to the largest television show in the country as executive producer. You're talking about a guy who produced Richard Nixon's Man in the Arena series. You're talking about a guy who helped stage manage Ronald Reagan. You're talking about a guy who built CNBC. You're talking about a guy who produced the Rush Limbaugh show. He's an extremely talented television producer, and there is no doubt Fox's production quality compared to MSNBC, compared to CNN, is so much higher. He puts all his effort into producing the best TV possible from a conservative bent and with a conservative political angle. And that's what's so dangerous about him, is he is one of the most brilliant television producers combined with a political heart.
So here's a question, an easy question. Many of us on the left, or many people in the left, wonder, geez, why is the left's messaging or entertainment, why does it look like kind of crap compared to the conservative stuff? Like, why? Why does the left not pay as much attention to the conveyor belt upon which the widget is delivered as the right? I mean, the right's widget is very powerful, but it's also delivered deliciously on a highly produced, high-quality bed.
Well, I think it depends on what we're talking about. I think a lot of people who are progressive are in Hollywood, for example, and produce brilliant television and movies and other things. I think in the case of television and radio, a lot of conservatives have ventured to those genres, producing excellent TV there. So I think it depends on the venue. And I think Fox produces some brilliant television, and I would hope that eventually progressives can do the same.
I'm right there with you. I fully agree. We're talking to Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. There's no question about it. I think if you put on your label, if you emblazon across your forehead, tattoo it right on there, I'm a nice guy. There it is. Look at the book he's holding up there.
I was tattooing it on my forehead.
If you screamed, Ari, I am a fair and balanced guy, it would suggest that somewhere along the line you either were not, or somebody had discovered that you were not, or had suspected that you were not. Otherwise, why would you even need to go there?
Well, here's an interesting story we have in the book. In 1972, Roger Ailes, starting in 1969, writes a series of memos to Richard Nixon saying, you have to have a Republican TV station. Republicans need to get better at getting in TV news. And in the early 70s, he gets that chance working for Joseph Coors, creating what was known as TVN, which was a conservative news station where they would talk about being fair and impartial journalism. And what they would do was sell packages of national news to local unaffiliated TV stations in the days before cable or satellite. Now, the business model totally broke down, but this is something Roger Ailes has been trying to do for 30 years, is create a network for Republicans.
Well, and it is not only born, it's been in its crib, it's had its diapers changed impeccably, and the thing is now a 900-pound baby.
Oh, now it's the biggest baby on the block, and it's more than a baby. It's a full-grown adult, and it's the biggest adult in the world.
Let's talk for a second about CNN and how it competes with Fox and the internal memoranda that have gone on suggesting that CNN act a little bit more Fox-like to grab that bit of market share.
I mean, I think CNN in itself tries to brand itself as the middle station. I think they've made some moves recently that suggest they're trying to grab that market share, but I think they've done it kind of haphazardly. Hiring Eric Erickson and Dana Lash. And frankly, when you see those two up again, like when you have, guys like Paul Begala who've run the best political races of the 20th century, Donna Brazile, who was a campaign manager, David Gergen, who's worked for every president, for the last 100 years, and Alex Castellanos, who's a very conservative guy who's worked on hundreds of campaigns. And then you have Eric Erickson and Dana Lash. They just don't stack up really against kind of the talent they have. CNN's problem is there's very little audience for straight news delivery in the middle, and that's where they're getting hurt.
I like watching Chris Wallace, although I imagine his father probably grimaces a little bit, but then I don't know. I've only met his father once. And I actually enjoy watching Chris Wallace on Sundays because I think he actually does a better job than most of the rest on Fox. He actually does, apart from his definite political leanings, he does ask some of the most probing questions. So to their rescue a little bit, but that's part of 1 hour out of 24. It certainly isn't enough to rescue it. And is that in there for the people that might cross across Fox at a certain time and walk away with a sense that this is not such a bad place after all?
Look, I think there are always those on Fox who do a good job. I think, Shep Smith, I think, does a good job in his hour, more than anyone in comparison to everyone else in the network. I think there are times when Chris Wallace does a good job. I think there are other times when he does a horrendous job. But I think they've always tried to maintain that we are this fair and balanced network. And he used to say, look, we have Major Garrett. Look, we have Major Garrett. That was the big one they would point to. And then they lost Major Garrett partially because of the biases within their Washington bureau. He took a huge pay cut to go work for National Journal at a certain point. That's the question.
We're talking to Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, also co-author with David Brock of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. And I think one of the great examples, Ari, is looking at the Tea Party. This thing was born, we were hooting and howling at some old lady walking around with a Lipton bag hanging off her hat, with an aggregate tooth count of 4. And it was the pure burlesque that it really was. But these guys turned it into a very, very serious political movement, bringing on Bachmann and Mrs. Palin ad nauseum, and really getting all of us to believe that man did indeed walk hand in claw with dinosaur just 6,000 years ago. I'll tell you, that shit works.
I think there are a few layers. I think, but right as the Tea Party began, which was with Rick Santelli on CNBC, Fox kind of absorbs it and really champions and promotes it. Before the first round of Tea Parties on April 15th, they ran more than 100 ads on their network that were, 25 seconds of Tea Parties in these states. Come here, go to the Tea Parties. They're fighting for these issues. And then 5 seconds of, and the only network you can watch it on is Fox, fair and balanced. So basically a full promotion for the Tea Parties. The second thing, I have been to more Tea Parties than most Tea Partiers at this point. I've been to the big ones. The Showdown in Searchlight. I was there. Which was the one held in Harry Reid's hometown in Nevada.
Yeah.
I've been to all the ones in Washington. I've been to ones all over the country. I think there were people who had legitimate anger with the government, and legitimate beefs that I disagree with them at their core, but there was definite real anger out there. And I think the question is that's fine that people are protesting and showing their anger. What's not fine is a news network pretending to be a news network while having their producers cheering the crowd on, which there was evidence that they were doing.
Not only that, Ari, but they were
psych up the crowd.
Yeah, they were listing on TV where the Tea Party events were
and putting it on their website and selling Tea Party memorabilia. Yeah. And there was this one moment, I think my favorite moment of the Tea Party, because it involves me, was I teach at George Washington University, and George Washington University was holding an event at the National Press Club, this thing called the Caleb Report, which Marvin Caleb does for PBS, and Rupert Murdoch was his guest. So I requested tickets to go, on the hope that there'd be a question and answer session. So I go, and thankfully there's a question and answer session. So I'm first up to the microphone. I say, Mr. Murdoch, your network has done the following things to support the Tea Parties. Do you think that's appropriate for a news network? And he said, well, I don't think that the Fox News should be supporting Tea Parties or any other parties. To which, was quite a surprise considering what Fox News had done for the year before that. A week later, Sean Hannity was supposed to lead a Tea Party in Cincinnati, and the Tea Partiers were selling tickets as a Tea Party fundraiser to go see a broadcast of Sean Hannity's show. Well, this came out right after I had confronted Rupert Murdoch with this, and suddenly that Tea Party's canceled. So the one thing you can't do is contradict the boss. Is clearly the one rule at Fox News.
Yeah, I think Machiavelli could teach us a lesson or two, or maybe Fox could about Machiavelli. And so could Karl Rove, who's a constant player on Fox News. Let's talk, Ari, about the birth of Fox News.
Sure.
Traditionally, in this country, we haven't allowed foreigners to own great real estate of broadcasting because, as we know, the Fuhrer, who is buddies with Henry Ford, back in the good old days, also wanted to own a bunch of radio stations. That was considered not the best choice. But somehow Rupert Murdoch, from the other side of Earth, is not only suitable to have it, but suitable to have it in color. How did this happen?
Rupert Murdoch became a U.S. citizen in the mid-'80s so he could own television networks. He literally became a U.S. citizen so he could hold broadcast licenses, which is a good and patriotic reason to become an American.
Hey, listen, if I could repatriate and own a bunch of broadcast properties, I would consider it too.
And look, I think Rupert Murdoch's this fascinating character because he views himself as a great newspaper man. And something we continually heard over and over again, which was a thesis of this book that's very different than what's been presented before, has been Rupert Murdoch has nothing to do with Fox News. In fact, it embarrasses him a little bit, which is what Michael Wolff had reported previously. In fact, Roger is the only person at Fox News who's allowed to do what he wants. Is the only person at News Corp who's allowed to kind of do what he wants without editorial control from Rupert Murdoch. And and that plays out time and time again. I think you see that when Rupert Murdoch appears on the network, things suddenly change for that 5 minutes. He was on Fox and Friends with Michael Bloomberg talking about immigration, and Rupert Murdoch is a advocate for immigration reform for allowing guest worker programs, for paths to citizenship, for all these things that on Fox we define as evil, right? So while he's there, the hosts are saying undocumented immigrant, and when he leaves, the standard form they use on Fox is illegals, and they go right back to illegals as soon as Rupert Murdoch leaves the building.
That's an interesting piece of insight. Having had the producers and various casts of The Simpsons and these other shows that run on Fox, which absolutely are anathema to the stuff on Fox News, and asking them, how do you get away with this stuff on The Simpsons and other shows where you really talk about nuclear power and all these issues you will never see on Fox News? And he said, the News Corporation is about making money. That's what they're about. And whatever, any ideology is good if it pulls in a market share.
That's not true. And let me break this down.
Yeah.
News Corporation is about making money with non-newspaper properties. They have been losing money with a ton of their newspaper properties for decades. What News Corporation's business model, as it's kind of even though it's a publicly traded corporation, one of its greatest criticisms is it's run like a family fiefdom of the Murdochs. And their business model seems to be make a lot of money on the entertainment side, meaning Simpsons, Glee, Fox Television, 20th Century Fox Pictures. Make your money with Avatar, which is this huge environmental film, and spend it on newspapers. So spend money on the Wall Street Journal, on the New York Post, on all these newspapers in the UK and around the world. So they're a company that's for making money in their entertainment division, which it seems Rupert Murdoch views Fox News as a part of, and then spend it on your newspaper division where you lose money.
Now, is that because you're married to the ideology of the newspaper division, therefore the political message is more important than anything else, or do you have, and I don't know, but this would be your expertise, is he in love with the notion of having newspapers, the good old-fashioned cigar-chomping newspaper publisher?
Yeah, I think that's how Rupert Murdoch views himself. He views himself as the greatest newspaperman ever. He's a modern-day William Randolph Hearst in that regard. And the entertainment properties help him with his newspaper habit, which in this day and age, sadly, is not a profitable industry.
Now, knowing your book here speaks about this juggernaut that is all-powerful. Hold it up and talk so we can see it.
There it is.
There it is. Look at that cover. Huge emblazoned FOX as we talk right now with Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect and How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. Make a noise so that your shot comes up there.
There you go. There's the shot right there.
Blowback from your book. I can't imagine that the staff of Fox, the executive producers, associates, the people running the Xerox machine, whatever, are going to be thrilled with you, pulling the curtain and exposing Mr. Ringling's big top. This is not helpful to them.
I mean, look, we've been starting a week before the book came out. Fox ran about 40 segments saying the nastiest possible stuff about Media Matters, about my co-author David Brock. They've claimed that that we violated our tax status, which just isn't true. They've encouraged their viewers to complain to the IRS. This morning or yesterday, Mark Levin, who's a syndicated radio host, said we're a criminal corporation. So,
I had dinner with him, and his table manners were criminal. I'll tell you that.
Well, my wife would say the same thing about me, so I can't criticize him there. But there's been intense attacks. But one thing that hasn't been attacked since the book came out has been the work of Media Matters. We have 90 researchers here who begin their days at 5 p.m. and I'm in the office right now, and there are going to be people here till 1 a.m. on the East Coast. So 20 hours a day, 365 days a year, our staff is working, fact-checking not only Fox News but the rest of the conservative media, making sure people like Rush Limbaugh are held accountable, and their work has not been called into question at all. And I think that speaks to the accuracy, validity, and importance of what we do.
Harrison with you. You are watching Go Harrison. Also, you're seeing a live stream on GoHarrison.com, as well as on YouTube, DirecTV, Dish, and other outlets. Also, the Progressive Radio Network. We are talking right now to Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the Senior Vice President of Media Matters, co-author of The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. And Ari, for the conservatives who are paying attention to this moment here, curious as to why anybody would put together something like Media Matters, work the hours that you do, monitor all these broadcast properties, and then hunker down and reverse engineer it, write it out smartly. That takes 20 more hours. What's the progressive thing they're wondering? Where do you come from in this mindset, this liberal or whatever it is? Like, why do you see the world the way you do?
I mean, look, I remember in 2004, in April of 2004, I went to work for John Kerry's campaign. And in the 6 months after he'd won the primary, in the 6 months that followed, through the election, I had an interesting view on that campaign. I spent a lot of time on the road with Senator Kerry. I spent time in the campaign's war room. And I watched a good, decent, honorable man who cared nothing but for service to his country get torn down as a liar. Get torn down as somebody who had served dishonorably when in fact the opposite was true. Who was attacked mercilessly by the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. And was enabled by a network. I'm less partisan and ideological than a lot of people might think. I more believe that our discourse needs truth, and if we have a discourse that's truthful, the best results will come out. And unfortunately, the largest arbiter of lies is Fox News right now.
Well, we're really grateful that you guys have this nonprofit concern set up, that you do the heavy lifting, the stuff that we can't even begin to reach out and wrap our minds around. We are so bombarded with data feeds and nonsense and BS most of the time that it has become so normal that it must be true or it wouldn't be on television. But you remind us that we have to have critical thinking, analytical prowess, and at the end of the day, have relationships with each other that go well beyond the digital mechanics of our lives, and that we ultimately are responsible for the messages that we consume.
Absolutely.
Well, we're really glad to have you aboard. Again, your book is called The Fox Effect.
The Fox Effect. Right there. In bookstores everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, if it still exists.
What is your preferred method for us to purchase your book?
However you want. If you want to go to the bookstore, look, I think local bookstores need support, so you go to your local bookstore. If they don't have it, tell them to order it for you. You can go to Amazon and get it. You can go to Barnes & Noble. You can get it wherever books are sold.
Wouldn't it be interesting to buy time on Fox to run a 30-second spot for your book and see if they would take the money and run it?
Well, about a year ago, I did buy time on Fox, actually. We went back and forth for a month over the ad. Ben Smith wrote it was the most free media he's ever seen off a paid advertisement. There were thousands of stories written because all I wanted to do was run an ad with the network's own words about why they were spending $1 million to support Republican candidates through the Republican Governors Association. So literally the entire ad was an American flag with the quote from the network spokesperson about why they spent $1 million to support Republican candidates. Eventually they aired it in the middle of the O'Reilly Factor. So they will take an ad from us with some editing.
Well, you're our favorite kind of hellraiser. You are a Harrison Hellraiser. We love Media Matters. MediaMatters.org. You can go to it 24 hours a day.
I will say this, Harrison,
yeah.
One funny thing. So the best thing we did, my favorite things I've ever done is bid at a charity auction, have lunch with Rupert Murdoch, which I won for David Brock and I and 4 of our guests. And Rupert Murdoch ended up donating $86,000 to charity not to have lunch with us. So that's something to put on my resume. Rupert Murdoch has donated $86,000 instead of having lunch with me.
You know what? You could put your head on your pillow comfortably at night knowing you did good in the world for many years to come. You bought advanced karma with that move.
Well, it's a lot of fun to sit at a charity auction bidding online for lunch with Rupert Murdoch.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Ari Rabin-Havt, Senior Vice President, Media Matters, co-author, The Fox Effect, How Roger Ailes Turned a Network into a Propaganda Machine. We're going to look forward to having you back on through one of our terrestrial signals down the road, and glad to make a new friend here. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Harrison. Anytime.
All right. Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.